I'm sort of live. I'm half alive right now. There we go. Hi, everybody. I'm back again, and I am here with another chapter of my dad's manuscript. For those of you who are just tuning in and you've never listened to this channel before, I highly recommend you go back to previous broadcasts. Otherwise, this is not going to make any sense because I am reading a manuscript, and I'm currently on chapter 25 of a bunch. So, yeah, I have all the other past broadcasts. So go back to those ones, take a look at them, and there we go. Um, as many people know, this is from the 1982 version of Guardian of the Sword. Um, there is another published version of the 1977 version, and I'm just reading this one to see whether or not I'm going to merge the two manuscripts together or if I'm going to do a special edition of this one. So let us read along. I will just jump right in because this is another good chunk. So here we go. Much care did the captains of Asbalm take to choose the best field for the final battle. It must be the one where the tactics which they had so long practiced and most perfected could be usefully employed, and yet one where they could be sure of the Hygerians actually meeting them. They desired a hill, forest, or some such thing to protect at least one flank, and yet one where they could put a good number of men into the first line of battle. They settled at last on the plain between the cliffs of Jarth and the dark forest of Chalden, where both flanks were secure, and yet a reasonably long line could be formed. The Hygerian War by Randall of Aventir. They waited at Hardinian for some time, and even when they marched, they did not move too swiftly. For some days they had been hearing of a gathering of the enemy of the city of Corel, but neither scouts nor spies seemed able to come near enough to say anything beyond the fact that they were there in great numbers. King Razak, however, had made a declaration. No more shall we send out a few men to deal with these. No longer shall small bands go forth, nor meager troops set out. Let the warriors of the families gather. Let each mighty man come in. Your king shall take the lead, and your lord ride before you. Estimates of the total force at Razak's command varied between 6,000 and 8,000, depending on the estimator's consideration of the fact the Hygerians had not had noticeable success in battle since Drick's Ford. Even Raylan had not been a defeat for Asbalm. It was true that since Drick's Ford, Razak himself had not come to battle, considering the paltry forces arrayed against them to be unworthy of his attention. The king had at first ordered the execution of defeated commanders who survived the battle, but he had eventually realized that the fault was not theirs. The commander who had met Bedran at the crossings of Relin, a man named Sharak, the commander of the forces who were later driven from before Hardinian, was not even completely removed from the king's favor. Previously styled favored champion of the king, or companion of the king, oh my goodness. He was now allowed only to call himself friend of the king, and was permitted only 20 retainers of his original 100. Yet the same Sharak remained as supreme commander under Razak. No man of greater status would take his orders directly, but the king listened closely to his advice, and no man disobeyed Razak. Thus came the host of the Hygerians to the cliffs of Jarath. Steep, black, forbidding, the cliffs brooded over the green plain above the encamped army of Asbalm. On the eastern side, they were unclimbable, save for the notch, the place where they had crumbled long ago to form a gentle slope up the grassy incline of the western side. Here follows the tale of the cliffs, which is the same as the 1977 version, which is its own special thing. Hold on. So they digress a bit. In a time long past, Clan, sorry, in a time long past, Olan, the king of Asvalon, had two twin sons, Codal and Jarth. Codal was but minutes the older, and a rivalry had grown up between them. Each felt better able to rule the land than his brother, though neither had thought much of anything beyond his own desires. Both were persuasive men, and when Olan died in a hunting mishap without naming his heir, the land was ablaze, its peace riven, I don't know if that's a word, by turmoil and contention. Three, to- Three times signs were sent up to the two, portents from the high powers that they should forego this war and make peace. But Codal swore an oath when wise men would counsel him, saying, "The high powers rule on high, but I rule upon earth." Jarth also rejected the advice, saying, "If the powers were able to do aught, they ought to remove my brother who is unfit to rule. Since they have not done this, what can they do?" Therefore, when the two hosts met for battle, destruction came upon them. One dark night fell in the midst of day. Thundered, raged, and lightning smote. The earth shook, and when daylight returned, the place where the two armies had stood was covered by a cliff of black stone, lying like a scar where the earth had suffered a wound. Yet there had been one amongst the host of Codal, one of the elder folk, Troyan by name. Troyan, who had both wisdom and courage, strove until the time that battle was joined to dissuade Codal from his course. Yet, because of the oaths he had sworn, Troyan went forth with sword in hand to the battle line, and was lost with the rest. But the brother of Troyan, Loranan the Wise, went on a difficult quest for learning, and sought out many of the secrets of the skies and earth beneath. After much seeking, he took his learning to the forbidden lands, to lay them before the elder council. Following this, he went to the cliff. None knows what he did there, though some say he smote on it with a rod. Some say he struck it with his hand. Others say that he sang only a song of strange words. But whatever he did, the cliff cracked and crumbled, and his brother walked forth. In that one place, therefore, the cliff was divided, and in later years, green grass grew even there, upon the crumbled stone of the cliff. Here, between the cliffs and the forest of Chalden, the host of Asbalon took its position. It was in this place, where the forest now grew, that Arvindal, bearing the sword, joined Corel. Here, Arvindal had smitten Chalden and his rebellious barons, smitten them and driven them from the field, so that the throne was secure for Corel. No, Coral. Sorry. Coral. It was said that Chalden, as he lay dying in the wreck of the battle, cursed the land on which he lay, and that was the result of the curse, and that the result of the curse was soon seen. Now the forest was dark and thick, a tangle which a man could scarce penetrate, and which few men cared to. Within it walked werebeasts, and things dark and difficult to name, things best not thought on. So it was that one flank of the Asbalonian host would be rested upon the cliff of Jarth, and the other on the dark forest of Chalden. They set a small group of men atop the cliffs to watch for the Hygerians and to signal when they were about to attack or make any special maneuver. Scouts and spies first announced the Hygerian force as large beyond counting. Later estimates set it at something more than 7,000, perhaps possibly as much as 8,000. The host of Asbeln, though slightly grown, was about 5,500, which was the number who would go into battle, minus whoever should, between this day and that, suffer some mishap such as would make him unable to fight. Though much time and effort had been spent in their training, they were still not of the quality to inspire the confidence of their immediate commanders. Veterans, this meaning anyone with 2 battles to his credit, were mainly spread among the newer men to give them both confidence and an example. The most necessary maneuvers had been driven into the recruits so much so that they swore they could perform them while asleep. Those who trained them swore that it seemed that they were asleep most of the time. Yet for all this, the men who were confident that they would do well. And when the time came for them to open files to allow the cavalry to ride through, not too many would be ridden down. Lesson learned, get out of the way of the cavalry. On the battle's eve, with the horizon red with the light of Hygerian campfires, they waited. Rourke and Connell were conversing when the old one entered their tent. I must speak to you, lords. They looked up at him, and he continued. As you know, it sometimes happens that seeings come to those of my profession. Seeings unbidden and unclear. Such a seeing has come, and though we have striven to make all clear, we can discover only that certain things must happen. 3 fights must be fought in the following days, and each will bear the seed of the following one. Tomorrow's battle, the fight of the armies, is the first. If it is won, then the Black King and the Gold will fight on the steps of Coral's palace. A battle of champions it will be, and if it is won, then the third follows. He paused. And that is? Encouraged Connell. A battle in the hidden place, where only the power will determine the core outcome, or even coming out again. So, he spread his hands, it is little enough, I know, for help or hindrance. But these 3 battles must be fought and won before the king may sit on the throne once more. Connell stood and bowed. Our thanks, old one. You have served our cause well, and we owe you much. The old one bowed in his turn. I serve as I may, lord. Turning, he strode away, tall and erect. About this time, Rourke and Connell took note of the clashing of iron across the camp beside one of the fires. Strolling over, Rourke and Connell found young Dolan and another man fighting with practice swords, with padding on arms and legs. The second man was tall and well built, making the slender Dolan seem small by comparison. And the 2 of them moved like swift, graceful dancers. The move which ended the match was so fast as to have been almost invisible. Dolan's parry and return stroker well nigh a single motion, and the watchers, recognizing the fair hit an instant later, set up a shout. Stepping back, the 2 saluted and lowered swords. Then the big, grim man smiled, a little ruefully. One of the warriors, noticing Rourke beside him, grinned and informed him. Dolan is yet to be bested, and has matched the best of our swordsmen. I can see his skill, but is he matched with Baron yet? When the men heard this, they began to call for Baran to challenge Dolan. When he demurred, they continued to badger him. He said that he was too old for such foolishness, and they declared that if you're too old for a friendly match with practice swords, he was too old for going into battle with sharpened steel on the morrow. Reluctantly, he prepared. He took a stand, right foot advanced, sword ready. One of the younger men said to one beside him, "I'll wager on Dolan." The other answered, "I will take the money of a fool as ready as another. How much?" And as they and others were laying their bets, Dolan lunged suddenly from a relaxed stance and was taken off guard when Baran's sword flicked upward, easily deflecting his blade. He barely kept his balance, and it was only a quick twisting leap backward that saved his skin from Baran's return blow. Dolan swung a backhand blow, which Baran also stopped. Then he lunged forward again. Baran seemed to hardly move, yet the thrust went by his chest, and his own point caught the younger man just below the heart. They stepped back and saluted. Dolan, too, a good warrior, not to know that even the best man will someday meet his match, smiled at Baran. Baran said, in his quiet way, 20 years ago, you were born, I became a warrior. For the past 10 years, I have trained the newcomers to our ranks. Indeed, it was that I taught the Guardian how to use a sword. He is among the best in the kingdom. The shout immediately went up to call for a match between Rorik and Baran. Both demurred, and when the men went on insisting, Rorik stepped forward and signed for quiet. I will not match with Baran, no matter what you say. Would you have me look a complete fool attempting to best the man who taught me all I know? Look elsewhere for your amusement. Why then, called a man, let the prince and the guardian show their skill against one another. Shouting for this match became so loud and insistent that the two looked at each other, shrugged, and began to prepare. When they had donned the pads and taken up the swords, they circled cautiously, seeking an opening. Twice the swords rang together as they sought openings which appeared momentarily and vanished as swiftly. Suddenly they were engaged in earnest. The swords flickered and struck, glinting in the firelight, ringing like bells. Back and forth they went, protecting himself both by sword skill and by speed. The watching men were silent, not even wagering, but watching in amazement. None could afterward describe the movements which led to the end of the match, but the two were suddenly standing, each with his sword's blunted point pressed against the other's chest. Stepping back, they saluted, then lowered their swords. The men continued silent until Baran stepped forward to say, "A draw. I will say that I have seldom seen such skill. I, who stood beside Karkal of the Silver Ring, and when the Vakon sea rovers raided up the Ilkhanur, even Garthel Longsword of the Elder Legends could scarce have done better." Then 3 loud cheers were given for the king and for the guardian, and the 2 young leaders walked back to their tents, while the bout was still being discussed by the rest of the warriors. "Well, Rorik, the men are in good spirits. It will all help us tomorrow. Tell me again that we will win. I keep doubting. If we cannot win, now is certainly not the time to be worrying over it. We have chosen the ground. Our tactics have made our cavalry superior to theirs in all but numbers, and our infantry has always been better than theirs. If luck is not totally against us tomorrow, we will win." And we have come so far so swiftly. We have indeed. In the old days, you see, when the Hygerians invaded our borderland, our hosts, our hosts marched through methodically, never passing on until they had cleared every barbarian from the land around them. This time, we sat in the hills, sending out our raiding and foraging parties, while they waited for us to form a host to attack. Suddenly, one morning, we stood at the gates of Verdan. Again, suddenly, we're at Orden. And though they had been expecting us to wear out our strength against the walls of the city, we were not expected so soon. And Ordan, which they thought ought to have held for weeks, went down in one red day of fighting. Then, while we fought against the land around, they gathered at Aventir, where we had stood them off for so long. The sudden fall of Aventir must have seemed like a work of magic to them, and it was at that time that they surrendered to us the whole land of the east of the mountains. But our magic was still strong, and after a few useless assaults on the pass, we were suddenly across and joined with Vedran. So often we have attacked where we ought not to be, and they worry over what we might do next. We stand now waiting on an open battlefield, and they hesitate, seeking to sniff out some new trick. While they are doing this, we will fight them, watching for any mistake of carelessness or of overcaution, and thereby win the fight. Connell nodded. Just so. I've heard the men say that they have spent more time in missing meals on forced marches than they have spent fighting the enemy. For a while they sat in silence. Baran came to the door of the tent. My lord guardian, I would speak to you for a moment, privately. Certainly. Rourke rose and went out into the night with the old warrior. After a short time, Baran spoke. My lord, you will know that I am the line of Ralph Starblade, and that we mark our beginning with the ancestors who fled the old island on the night of fire. But you may not know that some of the men of our line, it is given to know the time of their death. My time comes tomorrow, and all I may do it make ready. All I may do is make ready. Two things I ask. Take my sword back to be given to my son, and put Dolan in my place after the battle. He will serve you well. Rourke stood still and thoughtful. It was hard enough to know that many would die tomorrow, but to know for certain that this night would be the last night for certain men was almost too much to bear. He looked up at Baran and said, As you request, it shall be done. There followed an uncomfortable silence, which was suddenly broken by the shouting of challenges from the picket posts at the edge of the camp on the Hardinian road. Baron's sword was in his hand as he rode towards the source of the noise. In the flickering light of the torches, they found a swelling number of men, armed and half-armed, facing another group of travel-weary men, some mounted, others afoot. Their leader was a large, somewhat familiar man, of white of hair and beard, wearing a leather war cap and a chain war shirt, with a recent patch on it in the chest. Immediately behind was a younger, slighter built man, similarly armed, but wearing a metal war cap. His face was close and grim, and his hand rode on his sword hilt. Then the older man caught sight of Rourke, and as he turned his dancing horse, the firelight flickered on a pattern of silver threads on his scabbard. Recognition flashed through Rourke as the older man quieted the hubbub with a command that cut through the noise like a naked blade. Quiet then, the lot of you. The guardian is here and can recognize me and assure you that we mean no harm. He looked to Rourke. Perhaps you'd not recall me, sir, but I be Cata, son of Fanon, son of Brennan, son of Fernmal. We came to you at Verdun. When last I heard, Danon was a leader of 10 for the king. Vandenal will be at home, wounded in the right arm, so grievous as not to be using it again. That from Aventir Gate. Danon were left stark dead on the field at Drix Ford, and I were grievous wounded about the chest when we attacked the pass. Having recovered somewhat, I brought away Briogir and a few neighbors as wishful to come along. We gathered a few more on our way, and when we came to Hardinian, they told us that you were gone up here, expecting one more great battle shortly. But here we are, and this fellow greets us like we were King Razak and all his armies. So, Lord Guardian, please tell them who I be, and let us be done with all of this, and that these lands we may get to our rest. Tomorrow will be a lively day, I would wager. Rourke smiled, then turned to the sentry. This man is indeed known to me. Come, some of you, show them where they may rest, and see to finding food for them. And as Kata says, tomorrow will be a lively day. So best that you all go back to your places and rest. Indeed, in not too long a time from that, the whole host of Asbalm was at their rest. I don't know what that last part was. I slid into a weird. I don't know. Occasionally my R's roll. I don't know. It happens. Anyway, so I will not be streaming tomorrow night because I have a show. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do one on Friday. We will see how I feel because I have a show and then I have to work. And so I may be just coming home on Friday and going to sleep. If that happens, I wish there was a way I could post on Twitch. I can definitely post on YouTube to let you guys know. But it'd be handier if I could post on Twitch. I might see if I can try and get in there and practice the scheduling section of that. Sure. I'll try like actually putting in a schedule for this week. If that's possible. Who knows? That's why this is the test run. Test manuscript, test run, all of that. Well, anyway, thank you all for tuning in, and I will talk to you all again soon, within the next couple days. All righty. Take care and have a good night.